Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's Friday episode of Star Wars Lads. We're going to be talking about the hotly anticipated new Star Wars book, Star Wars Brotherhood, giving you our full review. For the first 10 minutes or so here, we're going to be talking non-spoilers about this book and then jumping into some of the spoilery sections, some of our favorite parts, and getting into a bit more of the details. So if you haven't watched or read this book, we will tell you when we'll get into spoilers, but you can click off there. But before we do so, please hit that like button down below. Subscribe to the channel for Star Wars content. We're switching up our release strategy constantly as we're kind of like getting into Celebration here and Obi-Wan Kenobi starting up soon. So we've been messing around with the schedule. Right now we're doing 5 videos a week, 3 shorts, 2 videos. You're going to want to check all of that out, but we'll also have videos every single day of the celebration, as well as a review for Obi-Wan and the predictions and speculation series for Obi-Wan also coming out. That one, the first one will come out, I believe, Monday after the episode, and then our review will come out same day. So we have a lot of Star Wars content coming in the next couple weeks. We're going to have a ton of videos, so stay tuned for all of that. Check out all of our other Obi-Wan Kenobi videos. I have a playlist on the homepage of the channel. You can check that out. But we posted characters that should be in the series. We've done 2 trailer reactions. We've also done top 5 favorite Obi-Wan Kenobi moments. So check all of those videos out. So now on to the review. To start, I would say this book, I was getting pretty excited for this book as we started creeping closer. I know Shadow of the Sith has kind of been at least the forefront of my mind, and I think most people's mind for the book releases this summer. But this one, as we got about a week before the release, it started getting pretty exciting for me. And I would say it didn't disappoint. I think the first third for me is a little safe. It's very Clone Warsy. Still enjoyed it, but it wasn't. I didn't immediately get sucked into the book to where I was like, okay, yeah, this is it. But as we start to evolve, as you start to kind of figure out what the plot of this book is, which is extremely simple, it's just Obi-Wan doing a political mission to Cato Nemoida, and Anakin is also off doing his own thing, but it's there's no like hidden layers to it. It's a very straightforward plot. But the reason you want to read this book, and the reason for me why it ended up being such a slam dunk success by the end of this whole thing, was the character. And watching the Clone Wars, we've all watched the Clone Wars for 7 seasons. We've all experienced so much Obi-Wan Kenobi content, so much Anakin content over the last 23 years. So I mean, we've had so much in both Legends and canon, and it's hard to really do something that's super unique. And I think at first when this book was coming out, I was hoping for a little bit more creative, boundary pushing kind of storytelling that we got in Legends, doing a little bit more weirdness, something that was kind of out of the realm of what we've seen in the Clone Wars and stuff like that before. And I don't think the plot necessarily did that, but the character work here is so good, not just with Obi-Wan and Anakin, but the other characters we've added along the way. We have the Nemoidian Rube Quarnum, who's a very good character, as well as the Jedi youngling Mil Alabeth. Both of those characters, to me, felt like such natural inclusions into the story, and they both elevate different aspects of their supposed, partners, I should say. Like Anakin and his relationship with Mil really informs who Anakin becomes, and I really appreciated that about really getting into Anakin's mental state, especially right after Attack of the Clones, because he is so different from in the beginning of the Clone Wars show than he is right after Attack of the Clones. And you start to see a little bit of that growth here. Roog as well, seeing her informing kind of Obi-Wan's outlook on the war and how he reaches out to different people across the galaxy, and kind of we all know Obi-Wan does not like politics and politicians, and kind of seeing Obi-Wan transform into that negotiator, into a form of a politician himself, as he starts to kind of find his footing in his role in the war. I felt like both of those characters had a really nice natural inclusion. We get so many different story elements that work so well, but for me, it was all about the last third of this book, when it really dives into Obi-Wan and Anakin and really dives into who they are and why they mean so much to each other, how their relationship organically becomes what we see it in the Clone Wars and what we see at the beginning of Revenge of the Sith. To me, that was what I was here for, and I ended up loving the last 2/3 of this book.
Yeah, I'm fully in agreement there. This is not a book that gets weird with it, right? There's There's more than likely a chance that Star Wars will never get weird with its storytelling in books. Books will always be kind of character perspectives or fill-ins or like, just basic origin stories for characters that we see a little bit more grown and more into their prime. But I think this is still a good step forward towards what we should expect out of like a good to great book. It's kind of sad to me that this is for me a top 5 canon book. I also haven't read a lot of the Thrawn books, but I want to focus on the positive here. I think, like you said, this is a book that kind of starts off a little bit more of like a traditional, like, oh, here's one perspective, here's another perspective. Goes kind of back and forth, and it feels very much like a Clone Wars episode. It's more of like actions, just doing, situation occurs, doing. I like the point that you make about Obi-Wan kind of becoming this like politician in his own way. Because when we see him in Attack of the Clones, his form of like being even keeled in all situations, he's not quite the same guy that we see sitting and having tea on Christosis to like, you know, allow Anakin to do his thing, right? Where he can play to his own strengths and Anakin can play to his strengths. And, those are vastly different. It works out because they're in such synergy. And this book really lets Obi-Wan figure that part out, his political nature, his calm demeanor, how all these different questions and ideas pop into his mind, and how he kind of approaches that in his overall actions. And we see Anakin, he's a bit more of a practical story. He's working on things that the story only takes place like maybe weeks after episode 2, things that are just have happened to him, like his marriage, the fact that his arm has been cut off, right? And he has a mechanical arm, the fact that he's been knighted very quickly, and what that really means to him, what his relationship is becoming with the clones and all that. So we're really seeing these things occur, and this book works so well, and it's a top 5 book for me because it does the best thing that I think a baseline novel should be. It should be at least a good transition thing. There's so much of the Clone Wars that has already been covered, but for me personally, what has always bothered me is that the first beginning months of the war have been basically untouched since 2003 Clone Wars, and even 2003 Clone Wars has maybe like a week or two, the first week I think of like the Clone Wars itself, leading into Volume 2, which is just like montage into the last few weeks or so. So there's nothing, and that's where 2008 was sort of meant to fill in and connect, but there's still a gap between those things that are happening. And here we get to see this transition, even if it's not like events of transitioning, it's at least the characters transitioning into who they are. And I think if books can, at least in the Star Wars universe, do that for different time periods, like maybe Shadows of the Sith transitions Luke more into the character that we see that he is in The Last Jedi, from the more Mandalorian era and the Return of the Jedi character, that already does a lot for me. I don't want to see like another, Kanan and Hera origin story, or like some random like storyline that fills in something about a character and explains who they are more but doesn't change them. This book changes them. This book provides transition work, and I think that's what makes it just great. And it doesn't ever let its pace, there's so many things that happen, even if it is a simple story, but it doesn't ever let its pace falter. There's other books that are really great in canon, especially a lot of the Claudia Gray books that have slower moments that I think get too slow. This book doesn't ever let itself be as fast as the Clone Wars TV show is, but it definitely is like, we're building into that. We're building into just these characters being comfortable with just instinctive, reactive, synergetic movement with each other. And if this is the book that when you get for this time period and nothing else, I'm more than happy, honestly. This did so much for me.
I agree with that completely, and I think there's a reason for this book to exist. Is one of the biggest reasons I like this as well. Like, this goes beyond just simply Obi-Wan and Anakin storytelling. Like you were alluding to, we've had so many books that just reinforce things we already know about characters and give us another reason why they might have chosen this decision that was important, but that important decision was in a movie. It wasn't in a book or anything like this. There are some important decisions being made here. There are some big impressions that are being made on our two main characters here by other characters in these stories, as well as the fact that we just get into their heads. And I think that is a super nice thing, because that's really the first time that's happened for either one of these characters in canon. We've seen some stuff behind the scenes with Vader in some books, very, very limited though, because he's always so mysterious. And we've gotten Master Apprentice with Obi-Wan, but that is more of a Qui-Gon story. So it's really nice to get those perspectives and really drive home those points and understand where they're coming from. And it ultimately makes this story important to have been told as a book rather than an episode of the Clone Wars, or rather than in any other form, really. Like, by the time this was over, I was glad it was a book and not a comic, a film, or a Clone Wars episode, because of those mental connections. You start to see Obi-Wan formulate certain things in his head, or Anakin formulate certain things in his head, and really you gain appreciation for the way they look at the world. You couldn't do that in any of those other mediums. So for me, that's one of the things I loved about this. I think that'll transition me into score, and then you can provide your summary thoughts and then give your score as well. But yeah, this was a really great book. I definitely recommend picking it up if you have any interest in the prequel era at all. If you're a Clone Wars fan, this is a absolute transition point from Attack of the Clones to the Clone Wars. We're not going to spoil it right now. We will in about 5 minutes. It might not start and really hook you immediately. It might seem simple, but it is the character interactions. It is the character thought processes. It's getting into those characters' heads that really drive this story. And for me, it was something that I had as low as like a 3.5 out of 5. By the end of this, I was like, I think I'm going to give it like a 4.25 out of 5. Like, I absolutely loved the last 2/3 of this book, especially the last probably 15 chapters. I thought were some of the best Star Wars we've gotten in a long time from books and from really any extended canon material outside of Clone Wars and films and stuff like that. So I really ended up loving this book.
Yeah, I'll also go to 4.25. This book is very close to being a 4.5 for me, but the one slight criticism that I would have, without getting into any spoiler, is that I love the pacing of it, and I love, like you said, it is really a book about that transition of their relationship, of who these characters are, into brothers instead of master and apprentice. And that is really why we're here, why we're reading this book. The story doesn't really have to matter as much. It's just to see that transition happen is the best part. But because the pace is just so consistent, there were moments where I thought, I don't know, give us another chapter or two. Like, let us dig a little deeper into we're just talking about, or what just happened between these characters. It is so much a war novel that even if it has some more political intrigue, even if it isn't a battlefield story, I guess the galaxy is calling on these characters to just get through things quickly and just adjust and become. And it's a point that is repeated frequently in this book. So I think Mike Chen acknowledges that this is a fast story, because by the nature of things, these things that are happening have to happen that quickly. But as a reader, I would have loved a little bit more of Obi-Wan's thought process, a little bit more of Anakin's thought process, because when we got a lot of it in chunks, I was enamored and I just wanted like another bite. But it's like someone pulling away the plate from you, saying like, all right, let's switch over to this food. And you're like, I love them both, but sometimes I just want to live with the food, you know? It's a really strange way of explaining this book, comparing it to food, but that's how it felt like to me. Like, I'm switching between these two quick meals, back and forth, when sometimes I just want to settle on one for a little longer. But yeah, 4.25 for me.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for watching our non-spoiler section of this review. If you haven't read the book, then now's your time to click off and then read it, come back and watch our spoiler section. If you have read the book, we're going to talk about some of the biggest plot points, as well as some of the dangling plot threads. Maybe they could be picked back up in the future here, and some of our 2003 Clone Wars connections, because just to start it off right off the bat, Mike Chen, one of the things I really, really appreciated about this, doing an early Clone Wars story, is he very obviously not only watched 2008 Clone Wars, he watched the 2003 to 2005 Clone Wars, and knows those scenes and knows that story like the back of his hand. He also read most very obviously, or at least was informed by the story group of things that happened in a lot of the Clone Wars era material from Legends. And there's a lot of references to so many things that maybe, aren't, it's not like they're canonized in here, but they're at least things that possibly could have happened or possibly could be reimagined. And I really dug that about this. I think as people, especially I've watched this the Clone Wars like from the first episode when it premiered on Cartoon Network, when it was a 5-minute first episode. Like I've watched every Clone Wars thing since then, and that was super satisfying seeing him at least acknowledge some of this stuff in the early era of Clone Wars, because we've had so many of these things dangling for so many years. Like, is this canon? Is this not? Can it kind of be canon? How do we kind of fit it in? Well, at least we got, some confirmations for things, some changes, but overall, like at least a nice building point that acknowledges some of the past history of the Clone Wars. I specifically really loved a reference to Ki-Adi-Mundi fighting General Grievous. To me, one of the best parts of the entire Clone Wars, the original series, also references to Shatterpoint, stuff like that. A lot of really cool things there. So what were your thoughts kind of on the reintegration of that original Clone Wars series back into canon and kind of picking and choosing certain things to bring in?
Yeah, I mean, that 2003 Clone Wars initiative had so many stories that kind of fit for a long time. And this canon book that fills in this period that has been wiped clear essentially decides to bring back so much of our first real Clone Wars content, the one that most people knew about when you think about Clone Wars until 2008, the 2003 Clone Wars. And those are all micro episodes that literally came in as like advertisements between different TV show blocks, right? It's such a deep core memory for me that I remember just seeing it just sporadically kind of be spread out. And it was so much happening, and that's unforgettable. And for this book to just be like, yeah, let's just summarize what happened here. Grievous's fight. Yeah, that basically happened because Ki-Adi-Mundi has cuts all over his face in this book. That's crazy. And then if that wasn't direct enough, they do the whole Dantooine thing with Mace Windu. And he's like, oh yeah, Mace Windu was facing down waves of B2 super battle droids, which is quite literally what happens, like wave after wave. That's how they describe in this book. And for Mike Chen to just be like, yeah, it fits, I was so happy. And then he does the one thing that I was very upset about. Not because I don't think it's a bad choice, but because I really wanted to see it become canonized. Ventress and Anakin's duel is not canon. So if you watch the 2003 show on Disney Plus, in a way you can take the whole first volume and say that all happened, except for maybe Dirge and the Ventress duel. Everything else is still fair game. And Ventress's appearances kind of happened in this book for the first time. It's way more tied to Obi-Wan because of the situation, the political situation, Cato Nemoida with the bombing and all that. But when Anakin meets her, the whole lead up to it is like Dooku's agent, Dooku's agent, Dooku's agent. And then Anakin's like, I know that voice. And I'm like, oh man, they're going to confirm it. He's the voice that he thought he'd never hear again. It's Ventress. And then they don't. And I was just like, okay, I guess they're fighting. Okay, that's interesting. Oh, it ties into Anakin getting more comfortable with his hand and like really embracing that. Great. And I mean, props to Mike Chen. He did so much. He pulled so much from that initiative that truly shouldn't have been wiped out as much as Lucas did. But there were parts of that initiative that of that 2003 era of Clone Wars that I wanted to just stay a little longer. And I really wanted to see this become canonized. And I think it still fits if we ignore some key paragraphs and say that Anakin has some short-term amnesia, maybe. But he doesn't. And it's their first meeting after Obi-Wan and Ventress have basically like 70% of the book together. Anakin has like 5% of the time with her. Yeah, I'm theorizing it's because they want to focus on that Ventress Obi-Wan Kenobi relationship being so much stronger in the 2008 show than Anakin and Ventress ever was in that show. That being said, does it really hurt to have Anakin be connected in this way? I don't know, but that was for me my biggest, not great, but just like I was there for the taking, and you didn't take it. You just went with the safer option, I guess.
Yeah, that was the only major part of the original Clone Wars that was definitely redone or remodeled. They could still have a fight at some point. I think, like, especially because that fight, like, so iconically needs to be on Yavin. Like, like it has to be. Otherwise, you lose so many elements of some of the cool stuff that happens. So maybe they have a fight after their first meeting. We could still do something like that. I think that was the part too where I was kind of like, okay, here we go. And the fight's good, but it's doesn't obviously live up to seeing it. That's the one, those are the types of things that when you're reading it, you can never get as good of a version as if you were watching it. But nonetheless, still appreciated a lot of the Clone Wars stuff that was thrown in here. We also have the biggest plot point for sure that's overreaching in this book is the Jedi Military Integration Act that kind of starts at the beginning, is out of the story a little bit, but what Obi-Wan and Anakin do on Cato Nemoida ultimately informs the Jedi Military Integration Act. And, obviously you can see the strings Palpatine's pulling from both Cato Nemoida and the Republic, and all his twisted machinations eventually unfolding into his push for this act to go through. And it transitions the Jedi from where we see them in Attack of the Clones to Jedi generals in the Clone Wars when that starts. And we see the armor on them in the first season of Clone Wars and in the Clone Wars film. This has all of that transition. We also get Obi-Wan cutting his hair because Anakin doesn't like it. He kind of gives him a comment about oh, you should cut your hair if you were going to be seen in public. And Obi-Wan's like, wait, what? I thought I thought everybody loved my hair. I loved your hair, Obi-Wan. You shouldn't have cut it. You should have kept it. Obi-Wan and Commander Cody meeting for the first time in this book as well. So there's some cool firsts that really are tied in with this overall narrative. But yeah, I think the Jedi Military Integration Act, that's something I never really, think about, because you just kind of think okay, Attack of the Clones is the first battle, so it's not set up. Then when we start Clone Wars, now they're in their armor, obviously they're in a war. But I never really thought about, okay, why did they change the way they look? At least that's a nice detail that I'm glad they added. I liked all the political stuff in this. I liked the stuff Palpatine was doing in this. I like his meetings with Anakin and the way you see him starting to pull those strings. We also get Anakin telling him the story about the Tusken Raiders, which is referenced in Revenge of the Sith. So, I mean, we have a lot of personal moments with the characters. We also have Obi-Wan the whole book, and this is I wonder if Anakin's going to tell me about what happened on Tatooine. I want Anakin to tell me, and then we never really know if he does, but it's alluded to that Anakin might tell him eventually, or at least tell him a softer version of it. And that was something also too, having read Kenobi, that's something that's big in that book as well. Check out How to Adapt Kenobi, coming out on Tuesday as well. But yeah, a lot of stuff like that, a lot of loose tie-ins to so many different important character moments that you don't really think about, are just kind of tossed out there in the films, but they are. There's lines in Revenge of the Sith that reference something that actually is pretty significant, but you don't really think about it because it's only been 3 years since you watched the film for the first time. So it's just oh yeah, that happened. But there's so much time's passed, and the characters have done so many different things that there's a lot of interesting tidbits that are thrown into this book. And again, it's the detail with Mike Chen of he's really kept up with everything in this 3-year period from the start of Attack of the Clones to the end of Revenge of the Sith. There's nothing really missed here in terms of the detail of direct quotes being referenced and things like that. All that I really enjoyed. Well, I guess the last thing I'll pass on to you that we could talk about here. One of the very significant moments of this book, character-wise, is the end when Obi-Wan starts to transition his view of Anakin to a brother rather than a son figure. Obi-Wan really never tells Anakin how he sees him, but Anakin sees him as a father figure in Attack of the Clones, and we start to see that relationship blossom as they fight, together. And Anakin starts to say, "See Obi-Wan smile instead of frown at everything he says," and it's just natural progression like that I really enjoyed. But there's a probably 3 or 4 pages at the end where Obi-Wan's just kind of like thinking while Anakin's talking, and he's like, he's seeing all these things about Anakin that he's never seen before, and he's starting to see the maturity and the different sides of Anakin's emotions and compassion and his relationship with Padme, and should he tell the council about Anakin and Padme, should he not? But the way Anakin's treated this youngling as well, he admires, and there's so many things that Obi-Wan's starting to get wrapped up in, and ultimately it all leads him back to Qui-Gon Jinn. And getting Qui-Gon as kind of a anchoring centerpiece of this brotherhood, of this whole relationship, and ultimately when that cracks in Revenge of the Sith, it kind of all comes back to that, right? The reference of you are the chosen one, being Qui-Gon's thing, really, and Obi-Wan's holding on to that. I think that's a really nice way to anchor their brotherhood, where eventually when you see that all fall apart in Obi-Wan and Anakin and the high ground scene in Revenge of the Sith, it means a lot more to see how much Qui-Gon was on Obi-Wan's mind through all this, because you don't really necessarily get Anakin's perspective in this book as much with the transition to the Brotherhood. That is the title of the book, but you do get Obi-Wan's, and you really get to see how he evolves into his thinking. So anyway, what were your thoughts on some of that stuff with the transitions for the characters into kind of where they are in the Clone Wars?
Yeah, I really want to build on that final point. I mean, Anakin, I mean, there's, especially as this book starts off, there's not really much about like the Brotherhood itself that he's worried about. His mind in every chapter goes back to Padme. Um, I think it's nice that Mike Chen acknowledges that there was a lot of cringe dialogue on Naboo and all these things, but I think one thing that people really, because of poor direction, failed to see in Attack of the Clones is Anakin pours his heart into everything. As a kid, he wants to help these random people that he's just met, right? Doesn't care if they're Jedi or princesses or whatever they are. He's like, "Mom, the only thing that you say is like nobody ever helps each other in this galaxy, right?" Like that. This kid, his relationship with his mother has informed him so much, and to have that acknowledgement of Shmi be like this almost like mythological figure now in his life, even though her death was so recent, how he's connecting to her and the peace and the maturity that kind of comes with that, while also kind of shoveling away exactly what he did and uh, on Tatooine. Other than when he talks to Palpatine, it was like you could see really that character grow, and he's taking the steps to like in moments where he has to be a professional, be the Jedi, be a husband. He's making those choices pretty assuredly, and I think it gives me a little bit more confidence in saying that this Padme and Anakin relationship is much stronger than a lot of people like to give it credit. It's cringy in Attack of the Clones, but it's quite solid in Return of the Jedi. And you see a lot of like the cracks of it occur in like season 3 or 4 onwards of the Clone Wars, especially with Rush Clovis and all that. But I think what this fills in for me and what I had a sinking suspicion in is that once Anakin marries Padme, at least for like a year or so, because he finally gets to be himself away from Obi-Wan's kind of controlling mastership, because he's has a chain of command where he can kind of push and pull as he wants to, because others look up to him and he can just say what he wants to say and it'll be unique and different and be a worthwhile lesson compared to other kind of dogmatic Jedi. There's so many things in his life that are just good and improving, even in the middle of a war, that just being who he is like the biggest part of his evolution. And it also means that his relationship is pretty great, I would say, for the first year or so, even if it is a total secret, even if they are like, like unable to hide it from each other, just how much and how deeply in love they are from even an audience like Obi-Wan, right? We have like a whole scene where Padme literally just says Annie instead of Anakin, right? and Obi-Wan is like there, and she's like, "Oh, Master Skywalker." It seems to me that at least in Anakin's journey in this book, even though it's titled Brotherhood, it's more about just him being confident, comfortable with himself, and it definitely helps that his marriage at this point seems like it's only flourishing, even if it's hidden away, it's growing, and all the best qualities of him are present. Obviously, with time, things start to crack. His darkness starts to that he kind of pushes down, especially in this book, to be the better picture person, to have patience, clarity, especially how he deals with youngling Mill. Like those best qualities of Anakin are there in a lot of Ahsoka's training, but the darkness of the war, the toil of all these different things like slavery and political ineptitude and attacks on Padme, all these things, they start eating away at him. And time just also eats away at him as he wants more and more power. All those things that he buried down kind of come out in the Clone Wars. But here, everything is great, which leads it to just Obi-Wan, who's, he's the same guy, but he doesn't have he doesn't have anything to tug on. Like he's a guy who's always expected to have a leash, like those like toddler backpacks that he has to like hold and pull back on Anakin. And his struggle of is just like, how do I deal with that, right? Like how he frequently in this book says my print, oh my bad, my partner, right? Like it's so much harder for him because all Anakin has ever wanted to do is be himself in the way that he knows he can be. Obi-Wan doesn't have to make any change in his character. He's already had his evolution and change under Qui-Gon, right? And he's fully accepted being Anakin's Padawan, but master. But to now accept why Anakin is on his own and why he could be the chosen one, and why, in some way, letting Anakin be himself is actually always the best solution in this situation. That's hard for a guy. I mean, that's hard for him. He's always been forced to like pull back on Anakin, and for the first time, he's like, "Oh God, like I'm gonna be disconnected, no communication, nothing. How's Anakin gonna handle this?" And Anakin does the most Anakin things, but they work out for him. And even Obi-Wan has to acknowledge, he's like, "Yeah, like it's great." And then when he notices that Padme relationship growing so fervently, like he can feel the waves of emotions between both of them, this could have just been, like old Obi-Wan, episode 2 Obi-Wan, just nipping it in the bud, be like, Anakin, we need to have this talk right now. What the hell is going on between you two? But it's because he sees Anakin just be himself and be happy and do all these things well, and it only adds to their dynamic. There's no more like, oh man, like I feel like I'm nudging him too hard. Like, oh, he doesn't listen to me. Now it's just like, oh, it's competition. Does he really want to intrude on that? Does he really want to question Anakin and his best version? I would say arguably, other than maybe the first season or 2, of Clone Wars, this is the happiest Anakin has been, the most confident he's been, and he's working on things. He's a big part of this story is, like, getting adjusted to using his hand, right? How does that become a part of him? No, how does he make that like, its own thing? That's, like, his whole realization at the end, that he is not replacing something, he's adding it onto him now, and it only makes him a stronger, better person. And Obi-Wan sees all these things happening, and why would he want to just step in and say like, "Oh, you should do this, you shouldn't do that," when he also is remembering at the same time, "Oh man, I'm seeing Satine on these Hollow network calls. Like, oh, did she say my speech word for word in this sentence here?" I mean, Anakin's kind of doing the same thing that I kind of did. We went at it different ways, but that affection, that connection is still there, even if it's just different. Yeah, I think Obi-Wan's struggle is it's so internal, whereas Anakin's never an internal guy. He just has to be himself. His struggles come when someone else forces him to think so heavily in tune with like what's going on with himself and balancing and putting things in order. And Obi-Wan's always been like the more neurotic guy. And for the first time at the very end, he doesn't have to be neurotic because he doesn't have to care about Anakin that same way. Now Anakin's just a brother because at the end of the day, Qui-Gon believed in this guy, and now he's finally seeing it. And all he had to do was just let him be.
That was well said, and I think Anakin we do get to see such an outward transition of Anakin um, in this book, but not only in this book, but in the Clone Wars, that it is like his place to be kind of the secondary role in this for Obi-Wan, to be the center of our mental struggles, and starting to see all of that evolution as well. I think this book handles both of their roles extremely well, and when the moments when they kind of eventually do transition into those brothers, like when Obi-Wan's plan is ruined by Anakin in this book, you know, it feels so natural. It feels so natural, and I think that's the best part of the writing here. Is you always believe that this is Anakin and Obi-Wan. It does not feel like different people, and it feels like them in a time of transition, which is also extremely hard to do when we have so much of their content in other forms. So
And
props to
it's a
Mike Chen.
story. It's a story that takes place so quickly after Attack of the Clones. Like the descriptions of Anakin's hair, like you said, on the verge of shagginess, of Obi-Wan just thinking back to what Dooku told him while he was held prisoner, and they're constantly repeating. It feels so long ago, but it was maybe weeks ago at best. And this transition in that such a time period could have been really just like, okay, no, we're just gonna jump into this, but it doesn't feel rushed. It doesn't feel forced. It feels confident in taking that step forward. It is a big step forward, but because like you said, Obi-Wan is the internal character, Anakin is the external character of growth, and letting each other be each other works at best, and that's why they become why they are in this book. It's just so surprising to me still that if this was like a year in, I'd kind of understand why their characters like this. This is only weeks in, and it felt so natural.
Yeah, an extremely hard thing to do for characters we all
Yeah.
know so well. But Mike Chen definitely nails it. So you guys should definitely read this book. Thank you all so much for watching. If you stuck around all the way to the end of the spoilers section, let us know down below what your favorite parts of this book are. You can talk spoilers down below. I guess preface it a little bit with maybe a comment that says spoilers right above. But we want to hear your favorite thoughts about all the different things that are in this book, as well as a general review. If you want to give a score, tell us all that stuff down below. If you haven't yet, please like the video, subscribe to the channel for Star Wars content. We're saying 5 days a week right now, but next week we're going to have a ton more videos, and the weeks beyond, we're going to have even more videos with Obi-Wan Kenobi. So just stick around for the channel. We're going to have stuff almost every day of the week right now on Star Wars Lads. If you haven't yet, comment below. Follow us on social media at Star Wars Lads, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. You can also listen to the audio version of all these episodes on Spotify, Anchor, Apple Podcasts, or your podcast platform of choice. Thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.